The DJI Osmo 360 is a great tool for capturing night lapses. One of the biggest reasons why is you can capture everything at once and then you can reframe it and add motion later on. So this is especially great for capturing a city nightscape or a big wide open starry sky. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you're in time-lapse mode. So you're going to go to the main menu here and you're going to toggle all the way to the right and select time-lapse. Now for a night lapse, there's a couple settings we're going to need to change here. And the first thing we want to do is we want to toggle up, make sure it's time-lapse and custom here. And then up here where it says 8K 30, make sure it's set to 8K 30. You want to get the highest quality possible. And then over here where it says wide, it doesn't really matter if you put this to wide or ultra wide, but I usually just keep it at the default of wide because we are going to reframe this later on. And then a helpful tip here, where it says screen off, I recommend selecting that. If you have the display always on, it's going to use a lot more battery power, and you don't need the display on when it's capturing a time lapse because your camera's just sitting there. So I recommend doing the screen off, and I'll show you in a moment what that looks like when we start this time lapse. And then we're gonna swipe up to set the parameters. So at nighttime for the interval, you're generally going to want an interval anywhere from about 20 seconds to 30 seconds because we're going to be filming this for the entirety of the night. Which, speaking of, when you're filming this for the entirety of the night, you're going to need some type of power bank plugged in to power this because there's not enough battery power to do a time lapse all night. You're going to be able to get about 2 to 3 hours from one battery charge. So there is a power bank that I have used for years now with all of my action cameras. It's one that Anker makes, and it has 20,000 milliamp hours of charge. I've linked to it in the description below. But for the interval, I generally do an interval of 25 seconds, and I'll show you in a moment why that matters. But we have to do that interval because our shutter speed needs to be slow enough. You can't have an interval that is shorter than your shutter speed. And for the duration, I like to keep this at infinity. I want this to be able to go all night. But if you want to set the duration, you can set it as long as 5 hours. And this also gives you a gauge of what that finished product length is going to be. So if you did a 25-second interval for 5 hours, you're going to get a 24-second finished product night lapse. But most of my night lapses go from 8 hours all the way to 12 hours, depending on what time of year it is and how much darkness I have to work with. So once we've set our interval and our duration, we're going to go back here, we're going to swipe down, and then we're going to set some of the advanced parameters over here, which are really important for a night lapse. So if you don't have Pro here, you want to make sure you select Pro so it's yellow. And then you're first of all going to go in here to exposure, and you're going to select the M up here. The M stands for manual. And what you want to do is you want to take your shutter speed and you want to toggle, and you want to go way down till we get to about 20 seconds. So once we set it to 20 seconds, it's obviously super overexposed during the day. That's why it shows that EV of +3. It's way overexposed because it's daytime. But that is fine because at nighttime, if you take this outside, you're going to actually see things through here. You're going to see it looking at the sky, you're going to see stars. And then for the ISO range, we actually don't want to have a range. We want to set this to a static value. And generally, I find that I get the best results with an ISO of 800 and a shutter speed of 20. And to be clear, this is for capturing a dark, starry sky at nighttime. If you're going to be capturing something in a city, like a city skyline, something like that, you're going to be able to have a faster shutter speed, probably around 4 or 5 seconds, combined with that ISO of 800. But if you're in a city, it's really going to depend on how bright it is in that city and how much ambient lighting you have. So if you're doing this in the city, you're gonna have to play around with the shutter speed a little bit. But the advantage of that is you also can take your interval with the other settings we just did. You can make your interval something faster, like 10 seconds, and you can get more frames in that time lapse. If you go to 25 for the shutter speed, your interval is going to have to be 30 seconds or longer. So that's where I like the 20 seconds for the shutter speed, because if you have an interval of 30 seconds, you really can't get all that many frames for a night lapse. And I want that balance of as many frames as possible while also capturing a lot of celestial objects. So I'm going back to 20 here and the ISO of 800. And I have tried this with an ISO of 1600, but I found that it really creates a little bit too much noise for my liking. So I do like to keep it set to 800. And then you're going to click the check mark here. And one more setting we need to change, the white balance. When you're capturing a night lapse, you want to have a white balance that's static. You don't want to do auto because you don't want the white balance changing on you. With a night lapse especially, it's going to look bad. My favorite is 3800K. I find that looks really good for a nighttime starry sky. But if you want a little bit cooler look, where you want more of those blues, you can do 3200K. And then if you want a little bit less of those blues than even the 3800K, you could do 4000K. But I recommend 3800K. That is my favorite for starry night lapses. And then at this point, you can hit the check mark and you are good to go. So what you're gonna do to start recording, just gonna hit the shutter button right here. It's gonna give you a countdown and it's going to start recording. And then in a couple seconds here, you're going to see the screen go black and it's going to show the red near the middle, just like that right there. And by the way, when you're filming a night lapse or a time lapse, you want to have your Osmo 360 on a sturdy tripod. And I recommend keeping it as close to the ground as possible. One, it's less risk of the wind knocking it over. And two, it's less risk of some animal coming along and knocking it over. Believe it or not, I have had animals at nighttime knock over my tripod. I haven't always seen which ones did it, but I have had deer do it. And I suspect I've had a raccoon do it before. The tripod I use is this one from Ulanzi. It puts the camera about a foot off the ground, but it's got very broad legs on it, which is really nice because it makes it very stable and a very low likelihood of it toppling over. So those are what the legs on it look like down at the bottom. And this does also function as a selfie stick. So I use this a lot with my action cameras, both for a tripod and a selfie stick. So I will link to this in the description below as well. Now, once you've captured your night lapse on your Osmo 360, it's time to reframe it and add motion. So I'm going to show you how to do that in the DJI Mimo app. And I've got a night lapse that I recently captured in here. And we're gonna do some reframing of this. So the first thing we wanna do is I wanna go up here and click dewarp. I like to turn the dewarp on. I feel like that gives the best look to it and it removes some of that fisheye effect. And before we reframe this and add motion, we wanna go up here where it says 16:9. And you want to make sure you're selecting the final output for the aspect ratio. So if you want to share a YouTube short or something like that, you would do 9:16. If you want that traditional 16:9 format, click that. And then there are some other options here as well, such as 1:1, and then there's 4:3 and 3:4. I'm going to do a traditional output, so I'm going to do 16:9. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to go down here and we want to frame our first frame. So I'm going to start it with this framing right here, and I'm going to click the plus. And then I'm going to scroll ahead here, and I'm going to actually cut off a little bit at the end because my camera was left out there a little bit after the sun had rose, and it of course was way overexposed at the end there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a trim point right about here. So I'm going to click on trim. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to the left and we're going to click that and we're going to hit the check mark. So now we have a 36-second night lapse, and at the end there, that's that pre-dawn hour. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some motion, and I want this to capture plenty of the sky as it moves. So I'm going to hit the plus to add a keyframe there. So now if we go back to the beginning and scroll through this, you can see what it does. You can actually see the Milky Way up in there. That's very cool. There, of course, were quite a few cirrus clouds at night, but you could still see a good bit of the Milky Way, which is very cool. But with night lapses, sometimes it's helpful to add a little bit more exposure because they're often going to be underexposed. So what we want to do down here is we want to click on color tuning, and we're going to click on exposure here. And I'm going to bump up the exposure just a little bit. We can't do much here, but I'm going to do about 5. And then same thing with brightness. We're going to add a little bit of that there. And the brightness really helps a lot with night lapses. And then the contrast, we want to play around with that a little bit. Sometimes adding a slight bit of contrast can help things like the Milky Way pop. Same thing with highlights, adding a little bit on the highlights and then a little bit with the shadows as well. As you can see, that makes a pretty significant difference there. And then a little bit with the whites too. And then blacks, we're generally going to leave that alone. Color temp, I'm going to leave alone. Tint, I'm going to leave alone. Saturation, I'm going to add just a little bit there. It's going to really help those colors in the sky pop, but you don't want to add too much because it can look kind of blocky with the colors. So I'm going to click the check mark there, and we're just going to toggle back through here, make sure everything looks good. The Milky Way really shows nicely there now. All right, so Now that I am done, I'm going to export. So we're gonna go up here where it says 1080p, and I recommend exporting in 4K. It's gonna give you the very highest quality results. And then for bitrate, I recommend selecting higher. For 10-bit color depth, we definitely want that. That's going to look best. And then noise reduction, even though it's going to take longer, noise reduction is really important, especially with night lapses when there's more likely to be noise. So I'm gonna toggle that on, and then I'm going to click export. So if you'd like to learn more about how to capture a daytime or sunset time lapse on the Osmo 360, check out this video right here. And if you'd like to learn more about how to get the best results on the Osmo 360, check out this playlist right here.